This is a work of fiction, determining suitable for mature audiences due to psychological themes. Structure is everything. That is the first rule of my profession, and it is the first rule of life, even if most people choose to ignore it. As a structural engineer, I do not look at a bridge and see a path across the water. I see vectors of force. I see tension, compression, shear, and torsion. I see the invisible burdens that steel and concrete must bear every single second of their existence. Every structure has a limit. Every beam has a yield point. If you apply enough pressure over enough time, even the strongest materials will eventually surrender. It is not a matter of if, but when. This is not pessimism. It is physics. It was raining in Seattle. It is always raining in Seattle. Or at least it feels that way when you're sitting in a luxury sedan that costs more than my father's first house, watching the wipers slice through the gray drizzle. The rhythm is hypnotic. Slish slash. Slish slash. I was parked 2 blocks away from my own driveway, hidden beneath the overhanging branches of a weeping willow that looked as tired as I felt. I checked my watch. It was 6:43 p.m. I was exactly 7 minutes late, which was unlike me, but today the thought of walking through my front door felt like stepping onto a bridge I knew was condemned. I looked at the house down the street. It was a beautiful house. A modern colonial with manicured hedges and a fresh coat of slate gray paint that Emily had insisted upon last spring. It projected an image of stability, of wealth, of the upper middle class dream that everyone in this zip code was desperate to maintain. But I knew the foundation was settling. I knew there were termites in the walls, metaphorically speaking. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold. I drank it anyway. I needed the bitterness to sharpen my senses. For the past 3 months, I had been living in a state of heightened observation. It started with the small things, the micro cracks in the facade of our marriage. Emily has always been a creature of habit. She is a realtor, a woman who understands the value of presentation. She knows how to stage a room to make it look inviting, how to bake cookies before an open house to mask the smell of damp basements. She had been staging our marriage for years, I suppose. But recently, the staging had become sloppy. There was the mileage on her Audi. I track our vehicle maintenance on a spreadsheet. It is efficient. It helps predict when tires need rotating or when oil needs changing. 3 weeks ago, I noticed a discrepancy. Her odometer showed an extra 400 miles that could not be accounted for by her commute to the agency or her usual showings in the suburbs. 400 miles is a trip to the coast and back, or perhaps several trips to the downtown district where the high-rise apartments cater to the young, aggressive financial types. Then there were the receipts. Not the paper ones. She is too smart for that, but the digital footprints. I manage our family server. I built it myself. It hosts our media, our backups, our security footage. Emily treats technology like magic. She uses it, but she does not understand how it works. She assumes that if she deletes a message from her phone, it vanishes into the ether. She does not understand that the cloud is sticky. Nothing ever truly leaves the cloud. I started the car and rolled slowly down the street, the tires crunching softly on the wet asphalt. I pulled into the driveway, the garage door opening with a smooth, well-oiled hum. I sat there for a moment in the darkness of the garage, gripping the steering wheel. My heart rate was steady. My breathing was controlled. I was not angry. Anger is a volatile emotion. It leads to mistakes. I was analyzing. I was gathering data. I entered the house. The air smelled of lavender and lemon polish. "Arthur, is that you?" Emily's voice floated from the kitchen. It was light, airy, practiced. Yes, I called back, hanging my wet coat in the closet. I aligned the hanger perfectly with the others. Traffic on the I-5 was terrible. I walked into the kitchen. She was standing by the island, pouring a glass of white wine. She looked immaculate. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose, elegant bun, and she was wearing a silk blouse that I knew cost $300. She smiled at me, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were guarding something. "You look tired," she said, handing me a glass of wine I hadn't asked for. Rough day with the schematics? Something like that, I said, taking the glass. I didn't drink. We found a flaw in the suspension cables for the Tacoma project. Microfractures. If we hadn't caught them, the whole thing could have snapped in a high wind. Sounds intense, she said, turning back to the salad she was tossing. She wasn't listening. She never listened when I talked about my work. To her, my job was just the engine that powered her lifestyle. Well, good thing you're so observant. Yes, I said, watching her hands. Good thing. We ate dinner in relative silence. The conversation was purely functional. We discussed the gardener, the upcoming charity gala, the weather. I watched her closely. I noticed the way she checked her smartwatch every few minutes, a quick, darting glance. I noticed the way she hummed a tune I didn't recognize. She was vibrating with an energy that wasn't meant for me. I have that conference in Portland this weekend, I said, cutting a piece of chicken. I'll be leaving Friday morning. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a microsecond, there was a flash of relief, followed instantly by a mask of disappointment. It was a masterful performance, really. Oh, that's right, she sighed. I hate it when you're gone for the weekend. It gets so lonely in this big house. You'll be fine, I said. You can catch up on your reading. Maybe, she said. Or maybe you'll just go to bed early. Catch up on sleep. That sounds sensible. After dinner, I retreated to my study. This was my sanctuary. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with technical manuals, architectural history, and legal texts. I sat at my desk and woke up my computer. The 3 monitors hummed to life, bathing my face in a cool blue glow. It was time to review the latest data. I opened a folder labeled System Logs. I had installed a keylogger on her iPad a month ago. It was not legal, strictly speaking, but in the court of my own conscience, I had issued a warrant based on probable cause. I scrolled through the logs from earlier that day. She had spent 40 minutes on a messaging app that was supposed to be encrypted. She didn't know that the keystrokes were recorded before encryption took place. I began to read. The conversation was with a contact saved as JM Financial. Jason Miller. I knew him. He was a financial consultant, a man who wore suits that were too tight and smiled with too many teeth. We had met at a barbecue 2 years ago. I remembered him finding my work quaint. Jason, is the engineer gone this weekend? Emily, yes. Friday morning. He's going to Portland to look at some concrete. God, he's so dull. I feel like I'm suffocating. Jason, don't worry, babe. Friday night is ours. Did you get the stuff? Emily ordered it. It arrives tomorrow. The special kind you like. It wasn't cheap. Jason, good. We're going to need it. I want to make sure you remember this night. I read the words without flinching. My pulse remained at 62 beats per minute. Infidelity was a breach of contract, a failure of the emotional structure. It was painful, yes, like watching a building you designed develop cracks, but it was a manageable disaster. People cheat. People are weak. But then I scrolled down. The conversation shifted tone. Jason, have you talked to him about the trust fund yet? Emily, not yet. I'm waiting for the right moment. If I push too hard, he gets suspicious. He's like a robot, Jason. He analyzes everything. Jason, we need to speed this up. The market is shifting. If we can get him to liquidate that portfolio, we can move the assets before the divorce filing. We need cause, Em. We need him to slip up. Emily, I know. I'm trying. I've been leaving receipts around, trying to annoy him. If he snaps, if he yells at me, I can record it. Mental cruelty. My lawyer says that helps with the alimony cap. Jason, just get him angry. Break something of his. Make him lose that icy cool control. Once he's the bad guy, we take the house, the portfolio, and we leave him with his bridges. I stopped reading. The silence in my study was absolute. This was not just an affair. This was a demolition. They weren't just stealing intimacy. They were plotting a hostile takeover of my life. They wanted to dismantle me, brick by brick, and use the rubble to build their own paradise. They were mocking my nature, my patience, my very identity. They saw my calmness as a weakness to be exploited, a button to be pushed until the machine broke. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and closed my eyes. I visualized the forces at play. Emily and Jason were the external load, applying stress to the system. If I did nothing, the system would collapse, and they would scavenge the remains. If I confronted them now, with shouting and accusations, I would be playing exactly into their hands. I would be the angry husband, the unstable engineer. They would spin the narrative. They would win. No, the response had to be proportional, yet absolute. It had to be structural. I needed a solution that would bind them to their actions. Literally, I opened a new browser window. I didn't search for lawyers. I didn't search for private investigators. I searched for chemistry. I spent the next 2 hours researching industrial adhesives. I needed something specific, something with a high viscosity, a rapid cure time, and an unbreakable bond strength. I looked at epoxies, cyanoacrylates, polyurethanes. I read safety data sheets. I studied reaction times with human epidermis. I found what I needed. It was a 2-part industrial adhesive used for marine applications. It was designed to bond rubber to steel in high-stress, underwater environments. It was resistant to heat, moisture, and solvents. Once it cured, the bond was stronger than the materials it joined. To separate them, you would have to destroy the materials themselves. It was perfect. I slept soundly that night. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I reviewed the blueprints for the viaduct. I pointed out a potential drainage issue to the junior architect. I ate a sandwich at my desk. At 4 p.m., I left the office. I did not go home. I drove to an industrial supply warehouse in the industrial district south of the stadium. This was not a place where suburban housewives bought pastel paint. This was a place for contractors, for men who smelled of sawdust and welding fumes. The aisles were narrow and stacked high with buckets of solvent, coils of wire, and tools that looked like weapons. I found the adhesive in aisle 14. It came in a nondescript gray tube. I also bought a small bottle of medical-grade solvent, a syringe, and a bottle of oil that matched the brand Emily had mentioned in an earlier text, a high-end, silicone-based product in a sleek black bottle. The cashier, a man with grease under his fingernails and a name tag that said Earl, scanned the items without looking up. "Fixing a boat?" he grunted. "Something like that," I replied. "A permanent repair. That stuff don't let go," Earl warned, tapping the gray tube. "Get on your hands, you're wearing it for a week. Get it on something else, you're cutting it off." "I know," I said. "That is exactly what I require." I paid in cash. I drove to a self-service car wash, pulled into a bay, and closed the curtain. I wasn't there to wash the car. I needed a private, ventilated space. I opened my trunk and set up a small workspace. I put on latex gloves. The chemistry was simple, but it required precision. I took the bottle of oil I had just bought. I emptied its contents into the drain. It was a waste of $50, but necessary. Then I opened the industrial adhesive. It had a pungent, chemical smell, sharp like vinegar and burning plastic. That was a problem. The trap had to be undetectable. I added a few drops of the solvent to thin the mixture slightly, making it pourable. Then I added a tiny amount of the synthetic strawberry fragrance I had picked up at a craft store on the way. I stirred the mixture in a glass beaker I kept in my emergency roadside kit. I wafted the scent towards me. The sharp chemical sting was now masked by a cloying, artificial sweetness. It smelled exactly like the product Emily had ordered. Using the syringe, I carefully injected the adhesive mixture into the empty black bottle. I filled it to the brim. The viscosity was perfect. It moved like a thick gel. I wiped the rim with a cloth, ensuring there was no residue on the outside. I screwed the cap back on. It clicked satisfyingly. I held the bottle in my gloved hand. It looked innocent, but inside, it was a weapon of mass construction. I placed the tampered bottle in my briefcase and drove home. Thursday passed in a blur of mundane activity. I watched Emily closely. She was giddy, nervous. A package arrived from an online retailer. She whisked it away to the bedroom before I could see it, but I knew what it was. It was the oil. She placed it in her nightstand drawer, third from the top, hidden beneath a stack of lifestyle magazines. I waited until Friday morning. I woke up early at 5 a.m. The house was silent. Emily was still asleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic. I looked at her for a long moment. She was beautiful, even now. It was a tragedy, really. If she had just asked for a divorce, I would have given it to her. I would have been fair. But she didn't want fairness. She wanted victory. She wanted to humiliate me. I got out of bed and dressed in my suit. I packed my overnight bag. Then, I walked to her side of the bed. I opened the nightstand drawer. There it was. The black bottle. I took it out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the identical bottle I had prepared in the car wash. I made the switch. It took less than 3 seconds. I placed the trap in the drawer and slid it shut. I put her original bottle in my pocket. I went downstairs, made coffee, and wrote a note. M, leaving for Portland. Traffic looks bad, so I'm heading out early. Have a relaxing weekend. A. I left the note on the counter. I walked out to the garage, got into my car, and backed out of the driveway. As the garage door closed, sealing the house like a tomb, I felt a strange sense of peace. The calculations were done. The load had been transferred. I drove south toward Portland. But I didn't go to Portland. I drove 50 miles to a roadside motel in a small town called Kelso. It was a nondescript place, the kind of place where people go to disappear or to rest between long hauls. I checked in using my credit card. I wanted a paper trail. I wanted the bank records to show Arthur Banks was miles away from the scene of the accident. I went into the room. It smelled of stale smoke and cheap disinfectant. I turned on the television to a news channel and sat on the edge of the bed. I had my laptop with me. I opened it and accessed the home security system. I had disabled the interior cameras a long time ago. Emily found them creepy, but the sensors on the doors and windows were active. And, crucially, the smart home system was under my control. I checked the time. It was 8 a.m. Emily would be waking up soon. She would see the note. She would call Jason. I spent the day working remotely from the motel room. I reviewed structural reports, answered emails, and participated in a conference call. I was the picture of a diligent professional. But a part of my mind was back in that house, counting down the hours. Evening came. The sun set behind the gray clouds. At 7 p.m., the front door sensor tripped. Front door opened. Then, front door closed. I checked the logs. It wasn't Emily's code. It was a guest code she had created recently. Jason. I imagined the scene. The greeting. The wine. The laughter at my expense. The anticipation. They would be feeling triumphant. They thought the house was theirs. They thought they had one. At 8:30 p.m., I opened the smart home app on my phone. I navigated to the settings for the master bedroom. There was a voice-activated assistant on the nightstand, one of those devices that controls the lights, plays music, and can make calls. I clicked Disable Microphone. I clicked Disable Speaker. Now, the room was deaf and mute. If they needed help, they would have to reach for their phones. But if things went according to my calculations, reaching for anything would soon be a physical impossibility. I sat in the dim light of the motel room, staring at the screen. I was waiting for a notification. Not a text, not a call, but an alert from the security system. 9:15 p.m. 9:45 p.m. The silence on the digital end was heavy. I knew what was happening. Or rather, I knew what had happened. The physics of the adhesive were absolute. Initial set time, 10 to 15 seconds. Full cure, 60 seconds. Once applied, once the surfaces were pressed together, there was no going back. I imagined the moment of realization. The confusion first. Why is it sticky? Why is it burning? Then the attempt to pull away. The panic when the skin refused to yield. The adhesive would bond instantly to the keratin in the skin, to the sheets, to anything it touched. If they were positioned as I assumed they would be, in that moment of vulnerability, the contact surface area would be significant. 10:12 p.m. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the house system. Glass break sensor, master bedroom window. I smiled. A cold, flat smile. They couldn't separate. They couldn't reach their phones if they had left them on the dresser or the floor. The voice assistant was dead. Panic had set in. In their desperation, flailing in that horrific, joined agony, one of them had managed to kick out or throw something at the window, trying to signal the outside world. The alarm system was triggered. The monitoring company would call the house phone. No one would answer. Then they would dispatch the police. I stood up and walked to the window of my motel room. I looked out at the rain-slicked parking lot. The neon sign of the motel buzzed and flickered. It was time. I packed my bag. I needed to drive back. I needed to play the role of the concerned husband. I rehearsed my lines in the mirror. What happened? Is she okay? Who is he? But beneath the rehearsal, there was the satisfaction of the engineer. The flaw had been identified. The stress had been applied. And the structure of their betrayal had collapsed exactly as predicted. They wanted to be together. They wanted to screw me over. I picked up my keys and walked out into the cool night air. The drive back to Seattle would take 45 minutes. I drove slightly below the speed limit. I didn't want to arrive too early. I wanted the police and the paramedics to fully appreciate the situation before I got there. I wanted the tableau to be set. As I merged onto the highway, I turned on the radio. Classical music. Bach. Organized, mathematical, precise. It suited the mood. The rain drummed against the roof of the car, washing away the dust, but some stains I knew could never be washed away. They had to be excised. I was not a cruel man. I was just a man who believed in consequences. And tonight, the consequences would be adhesive. I drove on, the headlights cutting through the dark, guiding me back to the wreckage of my home, ready to oversee the demolition. The physics of a return journey are technically identical to the physics of a departure, yet the psychological friction is entirely different. Driving away from the motel in Kelso, the miles had felt like a countdown, a shedding of weight. Driving back toward Seattle, toward the epicenter of the structural failure I had engineered, the distance felt compressed, dense with gravity. The rain had intensified. It was no longer a passive drizzle, but a relentless, hammering sheet of water that turned the I-5 into a blurred corridor of red taillights and fractured reflections. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle, their rhythmic thumping serving as a metronome for my thoughts. I kept the speedometer precisely at 55 miles per hour. A grieving, panicked husband does not speed. That is a misconception born of cinema. A man in shock drives with rigid, terrified caution, afraid that one wrong move will shatter the fragile reality holding him together. I needed to embody that man. I adjusted the rearview mirror, though all I could see were the headlights of the semi-truck behind me, looking like the eyes of a deep-sea predator. I checked my appearance in the glass. My tie was slightly askew, a deliberate imperfection. My hair was damp from the walk to the car. Good. I needed to look unmoored. My mind, however, was a clean room, sterile and white. I was running simulations of what awaited me. The variable I could not control was the human element. How had they reacted? Had the panic set in immediately, or was there a period of confused denial? The adhesive I had synthesized was a cyanoacrylate hybrid with a toughened rubber ambition. Upon contact with the moisture and amino acids on the skin, the polymerization would have been exothermic. Heat. Significant heat. Not enough to cause third-degree burns, but enough to terrify. Enough to signal that this was not a mistake, but a chemical sentencing. I exited the highway. The transition from the arterial roar of the interstate to the hushed, winding roads of our suburb was jarring. This was a neighborhood of hushed tones and hidden assets, where scandals were usually buried under non-disclosure agreements and expensive therapy sessions. Tonight, I was bringing the scandal out onto the front lawn. I saw the lights before I saw the house. Blue and red strobes sliced through the fog, bouncing off the wet leaves of the oaks and maples, turning the manicured lawns into a disorienting disco of emergency response. The silence of the street had been gutted. There were 3 vehicles already there, 2 patrol cars and an ambulance, its boxy shape looming like a hearse in the driveway. I slowed the car, letting it drift toward the curb 2 houses down. My heart rate remained steady, but I forced my breathing to become shallow, rapid. I needed to hyperventilate slightly to flush my face, to create the physiological symptoms of distress. I parked crookedly, abandoning my usual precision. I threw the door open and stepped out into the rain. The cold water hit me instantly, soaking my shirt, plastering it to my skin. It was a sensory shock that helped me transition into character. "Emily," I shouted. The name tore from my throat, sounding ragged. It was a good performance. I ran toward the house. A uniformed officer was standing by the yellow tape that was already being strung between the mailbox and the neighbor's hedge. He stepped forward, his hand raised in a universal gesture of halt. He looked young, perhaps 25, his face glistening with rain, his eyes wide with the specific stress of a situation he had not been trained for. Sir, you need to stay back," he commanded, his voice cracking slightly. "That's my house," I yelled, pushing against the invisible barrier of his authority. "I'm Arthur Banks. Where's my wife? What happened?" The alarm company called me, they said. I let the sentence trail off into a breathless gasp. The officer's posture softened instantly. The aggression left his shoulders. "Mr. Banks? Okay, sir. Please calm down. We have paramedics inside." "Is she hurt? Was it a break-in?" I demanded, grabbing his arm. I felt the wet nylon of his raincoat. "Tell me what is going on." "Sir, it's not. It's not a break-in in the traditional sense," the officer stammered. He was struggling for vocabulary. "How do you describe the grotesque absurdity of what was happening upstairs without sounding unprofessional?" "There's been an incident. A medical incident. Detectives are on the scene." "Let me through," I said, pushing past him. He didn't stop me this time. He escorted me, shielding me from the few neighbors who had braved the weather to gawk from their porches. I saw Mrs. Higgins from across the street, clutching her robe tight, her face a mask of horrified curiosity. She lived for gossip. I had just given her enough fuel to run her social engine for a decade. I stepped through the front door. The contrast was immediate. The downstairs was pristine. The lavender polish smell was still there, faintly, but it was now overlaid with the sharp, metallic scent of ozone, wet boots, and the distinct antiseptic odor of medical alcohol. There were muddy footprints on the cream-colored runner in the hallway. I stared at them. Under normal circumstances, this violation of my home's hygiene would have irritated me. Now, I noted it merely as data. The contamination had begun. Voices drifted down from the second floor. Urgent, clipped, professional voices. The crackle of a radio. The heavy thud of equipment cases being moved. "Mr. Banks." I turned. A man in a plain suit was standing by the entrance to the living room. He looked weary. His tie was loosened, and he held a notepad that was spotted with rain. He had the eyes of a man who had seen everything and was disappointed by all of it. "I'm Detective Vance," he said. He didn't offer a hand. "I need you to stay down here for a moment." "Why?" I asked, looking up the stairs. "My wife is up there. I have a right to see her." "You don't want to go up there right now," Vance said. His voice was flat, lacking the sympathy the uniform officer had shown. Vance was analyzing me. I could feel his gaze measuring my reaction time, my pupils, my sweat. "The paramedics are stabilizing the situation. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated the word as if it were foreign. "Is she alive?" "She is alive," Vance said. "Both of them are." I froze. I let the silence hang for exactly 3 seconds. "Both of them? Who is? Is someone else here?" Vance watched me closely. "You didn't know?" "Know what?" I asked, my voice rising in pitch. "I've been in a motel in Kelso all day. I was driving to Portland. I turned around when I got the alert. Who was upstairs with my wife?" "A male individual," Vance said. "We've identified him as Jason Miller. Do you know him?" I staggered back a step, catching myself on the hallway console table. A vase rattled. "Miller? The financial guy? Why would he be here?" I put a hand to my forehead, rubbing my temples. "I don't understand." It appears they were together, Vance said. He was using euphemisms, dancing around the reality. When the incident occurred. Incident? I snapped. Stop saying incident. What happened? Vance sighed. He looked up the stairs, then back at me. Mr. Banks, it appears that a substance, a chemical agent, was introduced into an oil bottle. Your wife and Mr. Miller are currently adhered to each other. I stared at him. I let my jaw go slack. I blinked once, twice. Adhered, glued, sir, Vance said bluntly. They're glued together, in a compromised position. I sank onto the bench by the door. I didn't have to fake the need to sit. The satisfaction of hearing it said aloud, of hearing the official confirmation of my design, was so potent it was almost dizzying. That's impossible, I whispered. That's insane. It's the reality, Vance said. Paramedics are trying to figure out how to transport them. It's not safe to separate them here. The bond is too strong. The risk of permanent injury is high. Oh my God, I mumbled, burying my face in my hands. I rocked back and forth slightly. Emily, we need to ask you a few questions, Mr. Banks, Vance said, taking a step closer. About the products in your home. About who had access. Ask me. I looked up, my eyes wide. You think I wasn't even here. I was working. I have receipts. I have emails. We'll check all that, Vance said soothingly, but the suspicion was there. It had to be. In a domestic scenario, the husband is always the first variable to isolate. Right now, we just need to know if you recognize any chemical smells in the house. Did you do any repairs recently? Use any industrial adhesives? I'm an engineer, I said. I have a workshop in the garage. I have Epixy's sealants, but I haven't used anything inside the house. Why? What was it? We don't know yet, Vance said. Lab boys will have to scrape a sample. But it's strong. Industrial grade. A heavy thumping sound came from the stairs. A groan, deep, guttural, and masculine, echoed through the hallway, followed by a sharp, high-pitched cry of pain that was unmistakably Emily. Careful. Watch the angle, a paramedic shouted. I stood up. I need to see, I said. Sir, Vance started. She's my wife, I shouted, pushing past him. I ran to the bottom of the stairs. What I saw coming down the landing was a tableau of absolute humiliation. The paramedics were struggling. The staircase in our house is a curved, architectural feature, elegant and wide, but it was not designed for a double-width stretcher. They hadn't been able to put them on a stretcher yet. Instead, they were moving them on a reinforced heavy-duty carry sheet for men straining under the weight of two human bodies locked. They were covered with a yellow thermal blanket, but the shape was undeniable. It was a lump, a two-headed, four-legged creature of tragedy. Emily's face was visible for a split second as they turned the corner. She looked aged. Her makeup was smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks. Her eyes were red, swollen shut. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was whimpering a low, broken sound of exhaustion. She looked at me, or at least she looked in my direction. I don't think she could focus. Jason was hidden beneath the blanket, but his legs stuck out at an awkward angle. He was cursing, a low stream of filth directed at the paramedics, at the house, at the universe. Easy, on the count of 3 lift, the lead paramedic barked. They maneuvered the mass past me. The smell hit me then. It wasn't just the chemical strawberry scent of the adhesive, which still lingered faintly. It was the smell of fear. They had been trapped there for hours. Biology does not stop just because you are immobilized. The indignity of it was total. Arthur. Emily's voice was a croak. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. I looked at her. I put all the betrayal, all the hurt I was supposed to feel into my eyes. Emily, what have you done? She started to sob, but the movement caused pain. It hurts, she gasped. Make it stop. Please, Arthur. Help me. I don't know what to do, I said, my voice trembling. They're taking you to the hospital. It burns, she whispered. As they carried them out the front door into the rain, I noticed something. A small detail that only I would appreciate. On the bedside table of the stretcher, Tucked into a bag of personal effects the police had collected was the smart home device. The cylinder I had silenced remotely. I looked at Detective Vance. Ow, how long were they like that? Vance grimaced. He closed his notebook. Hard to say, based on the 911 call. Well, that's the strange part. We didn't get a 911 call from them. We got a perimeter alarm notification. A glass break sensor. Glass break? I asked. Yeah. The bedroom window was smashed from the inside. A heavy perfume bottle was thrown through it. A neighbor heard the crash and called it in as a potential burglary. When patrol arrived, they heard screaming. Why didn't they just call? I asked, looking at the bag with the smart speaker. There's a phone right there. There's a voice assistant. Vance shook his head. Phones were on the floor, out of reach. We checked. And the voice thing? It was unplugged or malfunctioning. Dead as a doornail. They were screaming for help for hours, Mr. Banks. But with the windows double-paned and the rain, nobody heard a thing until the glass broke. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. This was the cold weld, the silence. I had calculated the adhesion, the bond strength, the sheer force, but I hadn't fully calculated the psychological terror of the silence. To be trapped in the act of betrayal, physically fused to the instrument of that betrayal, unable to separate, unable to call for help, listening to the rain and the silence of the house you thought you owned. That was a punishment beyond the physical. They had been forced to exist in the exact center of their sin, with no distraction, no escape. Just them, the smell of the strawberry adhesive, and the realization of what was happening. That's terrible, I said softly. It's a nightmare, Vance agreed. Look, Mr. Banks, you need to come down to the station. We need a formal statement, and you'll probably want to go to Harborview after. That's where they're taking them. It's the only trauma center equipped for delicate separation surgery. I'll come, I said. Let me just get my coat and turn off the lights. We'll wait outside, Vance said. He looked at me with a strange expression. Was it pity, or was it the first flicker of doubt? It didn't matter. I was the husband who came home to find his life destroyed. I was the victim. Vance walked out, leaving the door open. The wind blew rain into the hallway, soaking the expensive rug. I stood alone in the hallway for a moment. I looked up the stairs into the darkness of the second floor. The house felt lighter. The tension was gone. The structural integrity had been compromised. Yes, but the rot had been exposed. The termites had been fumigated. I walked into the kitchen. The note I had left, M, leaving for Portland, was still on the counter. She had seen it. She had crumpled it up and tossed it near the trash, but missed. I picked it up. I smoothed it out. I placed it in my pocket. Then, I walked to the security panel by the garage door. I entered my code. The system beeped. System disarmed. I thought about the hospital. Harborview was a chaotic place on a Friday night. Gunshot wounds, overdoses, car crashes. And now, the lover's knot, as the nurses would inevitably call them. The bill would be astronomical. Specialized surgeons, dermatologists, plastic reconstruction. I pulled out my phone. I had one more notification to check. I opened my insurance provider's app. I navigated to the policy overview. There was time-stamped yesterday. Policy update, dependent Emily Banks. Coverage tier adjusted to basic/emergency only. Elective and reckless conduct exclusions applied. It was a risky move, legally speaking. A judge might overturn it later during the divorce. But in the immediate present, in the next 12 hours, when the hospital administration ran her card, it would flag. They would demand a deposit, a massive one. And since our joint accounts were currently frozen, another safety feature I had triggered due to suspicious activity on the credit cards earlier today, Jason Miller was about to find out exactly how much his night of passion cost. I walked out of the house. I pulled the front door shut. It locked with a solid, heavy thud. The ambulance was already pulling away, lights flashing, but no siren. There was no rush now. The damage was done. They weren't dying, they were just stuck. I walked to my car. Mrs. Higgins was still on her porch. She caught my eye. She looked like she wanted to wave or call out, but she didn't know the etiquette for this level of disaster. I gave her a small, shell-shocked nod. Let her tell a neighborhood I was holding it together. Let her tell them I was a stoic man facing tragedy. I got in my car. The interior was still cold. I put my hands on the steering wheel. I looked at the dark house one last time. It was strange. I felt no guilt. I searched for it, probing my conscience like a tongue probing a loose tooth, but there was nothing. No sharp pang of regret. Only the dull, flat sensation of a problem solved. A bridge had been unstable. I had closed it. I started the engine. The wipers resumed their work. Slish slash. Slish slash. I followed the police cruiser out of the cul-de-sac. The rain washed over the car, cleansing, relentless. I thought about the adhesive again. It was designed to cure underwater. The more moisture present, the tighter the bond. Tears, sweat, rain. All of it only made the trap stronger. I turned onto the main road, merging into the traffic. I was going to the police station to play the role of a lifetime. I would be confused. I would be devastated. I would be the cuckold who lost his dignity. But as I drove, I allowed myself a single, private thought, a small victory in the privacy of my own mind. It held. The chemistry was sound. The engineering was flawless. Now came the demolition. I reached over and turned up the volume on the radio. The Bach cello suite was still playing, ideally suited for the dismantling of a life. I drove on into the wet, dark night, ready to watch them fall apart while I stood completely still. I arrived at the precinct 20 minutes later. The building was a brutalist block of concrete, stained by years of city grime. It looked like a fortress. Appropriate. I parked in the visitor lot. My hands were steady as I turned off the ignition. I checked my phone one last time. A text from my lawyer. Automated response confirming our appointment for Monday morning. Perfect timing. By Monday, the story would be national news. By Monday, the narrative would be set. I stepped out of the car, letting the rain soak me again, ensuring the distraught husband look was maintained. I walked toward the glass doors of the station, my reflection approaching me. A man in a wetsuit. A man with a plan. A man who had just welded his enemies to their own destruction. I pushed the door open and walked into the fluorescent brightness of the lobby. "I'm here to see Detective Vance," I told the desk sergeant, my voice trembling just enough. "It's about my wife." The sergeant looked up, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized the name from the dispatch logs. "Right. The Banks case. Have a seat, sir." I sat on the hard plastic chair. I waited, and as I waited, I began to construct the next phase of the collapse. The lawsuit, the media leak, the final, crushing weight of public opinion. The night was young, and the glue was still curing. Hospitals are, in essence, biological repair shops. As an engineer, I have always appreciated their function, if not their aesthetic. They are designed for efficiency, for the routing of fluids, gases, and bodies. They are systems of triage and stabilization. But Harborview Medical Center at 11 p.m. on a Friday night was a system operating at maximum capacity, straining against its own load limits. I walked through the sliding glass doors of the emergency department, leaving the damp, dark comfort of the Seattle rain for the blinding, aggressive wash of fluorescent light. The air inside was different. It didn't smell like rain. It smelled of industrial cleaner, latex, floor wax, and that metallic, copper tang of human distress. It was a sterile hell, white and cold, illuminated by flickering tubes that hummed with a frequency that seemed to vibrate directly against my skull. I approached the reception desk. My suit was still damp, my hair plastered to my forehead. I consciously slumped my shoulders, rounding my posture to suggest a man crushed by the weight of sudden tragedy. "I'm Arthur Banks," I said to the triage nurse behind the high plexiglass wall. "My wife, Emily Banks. She was brought in by ambulance." The police said. The nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, stopped typing. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She looked up at me, and I saw this spark of recognition. It wasn't the recognition of fame. It was the recognition of infamy. The story had already traveled through the hospital grapevine. News of the adhesion case would have moved faster than any virus. "Mr. Banks," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming hushed and conspiratorial. "Yes, we've been expecting you. Please, just a moment." She picked up a phone, whispered something urgent, and then buzzed the door open. "Follow the yellow line on the floor. Social services and Dr. Aris are waiting in the family consultation room. Room 4B. I nodded, offering a weak, trembling smile. Is she okay?" "They're assessing the situation, sir," Brenda said, avoiding eye contact. "It's complex." I walked down the corridor. The hospital was a hive of activity. Gurneys rattled past, pushed by orderlies in blue scrubs. I saw a man holding a towel to his head, a woman weeping into a cell phone. Ordinary tragedies. Broken bones, fevers, bad decisions. But my tragedy was special. My tragedy was an engineering marvel. I reached room 4B. It was a small, windowless box furnished with uncomfortable chairs upholstered in generic, stain-resistant fabric. A box of tissues sat in the center of a low table, an offering to the grief that usually inhabited this space. 2 people were waiting. One was Detective Vance, who had beaten me here. The other was a tall, severe-looking man in a white coat, holding a tablet computer. "Mr. Banks," the doctor said, stepping forward. "I am Dr. Aris. I'm the chief surgical resident on duty tonight." "Doctor," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, professional. "Please tell me. The police said something about glue?" Dr. Aris gestured for me to sit. I collapsed into one of the chairs, burying my face in my hands for a moment before looking up, eyes wide with feigned bewilderment. "It is significantly more than just glue, Mr. Banks," Dr. Aris began, his tone clinical and precise. "Your wife and a male companion, Mr. Miller, were admitted in a state of inseparable physical contact. The adhesive agent involved appears to be a high-strength industrial cyanoacrylate hybrid, likely a 2-part epoxy used for marine or heavy construction applications." I listened, nodding slowly. I knew the specs. I knew them better than he did. I knew the shear strength was 3,000 pounds per square inch. "The issue," Dr. Aris continued, tapping his tablet to bring up a diagram, "is that the adhesive has bonded with the keratin in the epidermis. Because of the nature of their contact, the surface area is extensive. We're talking about the torso, the abdomen, and the chemical reaction during the curing process generated heat, causing extreme irritation, which has further complicated the tissue integrity." "Oh God," I whispered. Can you get them apart?" Dr. Aris hesitated. That hesitation was the highest compliment he could have paid to my work. "We have tried standard solvents," he said. "Acetone, nitromethane. They are ineffective. The bond is resistant to chemical dissolution. If we use anything stronger, we risk entering the bloodstream and causing systemic toxicity. We cannot simply wash it off." "So what do you do?" I asked. "We have to operate," Dr. Aris said grimly. "We have to surgically excise the bond. In layman's terms, Mr. Banks, we cannot separate the glue from the skin. We have to perform a complex separation procedure. We will need to perform a series of incisions to remove the affected tissue. It will be distinct. There will be significant scarring. Skin grafts will be required for both patients. Plastic surgery will be necessary to restore function and aesthetics." I stared at him. I was imagining the cost. Not just the physical cost, but the financial one. Skin grafts, plastic surgery, specialized operating room time, anesthesiology for 2 adults simultaneously. "Is she in pain?" I asked. "We have them on high-dose morphine," Dr. Aris said. "But yes, the position is unnatural. Their muscles are cramping. The psychological distress is extreme. We have had to sedate them heavily to prevent them from injuring each other further." When they were conscious, they were combative. Combative, they were blaming each other. Detective Vance interjected from the corner of the room. He had been watching me the entire time, a silent observer in the shadows. I turned to Vance. Blaming each other? For what? Vance stepped into the light. For the glue, Mr. Banks. Mr. Miller claims your wife bought a cheap knockoff product. Your wife claims Mr. Miller brought the bottle himself. They were screaming about it until the sedatives kicked in. Neither of them seems to think you did it. Why would they? I asked, spreading my hands. I wasn't even there. I didn't know about any of this. Vance narrowed his eyes. Dr. Harris says this glue is industrial. Marine grade. You're a structural engineer, right? You build bridges. You deal with this kind of stuff. I deal with concrete and steel. I corrected him, keeping my voice steady. I don't keep marine adhesive in my bedroom nightstand, detective. If she and this man were engaging in experimentation, I don't know what they bought. Emily buys things online all the time. She doesn't read labels. She just clicks buy. We're checking her purchase history, Vance said. And yours. Check whatever you want, I said, a flash of defensive anger entering my voice. My wife is lying on a table, facing terrible consequences because of her own infidelity, and you're interrogating me? I'm just asking questions, Mr. Banks, Vance said calmly. It's a very specific chemical. It's an unusual weapon. It's not a weapon, I snapped. It sounds like a tragic, stupid accident. A product defect? A mix-up? I don't know. Maybe she kept super glue in the same drawer for repairing jewelry and grabbed the wrong bottle in the dark? Have you thought of that? Vance didn't answer. He just made a note in his little pad. I knew that theory was plausible. Emily was chaotic. Her drawers were messy. It was a reasonable doubt. Dr. Harris cleared his throat. Mr. Banks, regardless of how this happened, we need to proceed. The longer they remain attached, the higher the risk of infection. We need to move them to the OR immediately. However, there is an administrative matter. Administrative? I asked. Billing, Dr. Harris said. This is an elective trauma surgery involving 2 patients, followed by cosmetic reconstruction. It is expensive. The door opened, and a woman in a gray suit walked in. She held a clipboard and had the demeanor of a tax auditor. This was Ms. Gable, the hospital administrator. I knew her type. She was the gatekeeper. Mr. Banks, she said briskly, I'm sorry for the circumstances. We need to verify insurance coverage before we proceed with the non-life-saving portions of the reconstruction. We have Emily Banks listed under your policy with Pacific Northwest Assurance. Yes, I said. That's correct. I just ran the verification, Ms. Gable said, frowning at her clipboard. There seems to be a flag on the account. It says the policy was updated yesterday. I nodded slowly. Yes. I adjusted our household budget. I spoke to the broker yesterday morning. Why? Well, Ms. Gable adjusted her glasses. The coverage for Mrs. Banks has been downgraded to Tier 4, catastrophic emergency only. This covers life support and stabilization. It does not cover surgical separation unless there is an immediate threat to life, which, strictly speaking, there isn't. They are stable. Furthermore, there's an exclusion code, 44B. What is 44B? I asked, feigning ignorance. Reckless conduct and hazardous activity, Ms. Gable read. Because the injury was self-inflicted during a recreational activity involving unapproved chemical substances, the insurer is denying the claim for the reconstruction and the grafts. They are categorizing this as cosmetic repair of self-inflicted injury. Silence filled the room. Dr. Harris looked at the floor. Detective Vance looked at me with renewed interest. So, I started, my voice trembling. So they won't pay? They will pay for the ambulance and the initial ER room, Ms. Gable said. But the surgery? The separation? The plastic surgeon? That will be out of pocket. How much? I asked. Ms. Gable hesitated. The estimate, considering 2 surgical teams are required, plus the hospital stay, You were looking at approximately $140,000 up front, or a substantial deposit. I stood up, pacing the small room. I don't have that kind of liquidity. Not right now. Our assets are tied up in investments. And with the investigation, I looked at Vance. My accounts might be frozen if this becomes a legal matter. Mr. Banks, Ms. Gable said softly. What about Mr. Miller? Does he have coverage? I don't know, I said. He's a financial consultant. I assume so. We checked, she said. His insurance is through his employer. However, we received a notification 10 minutes ago. His employer has terminated his policy effective immediately due to violation of company morality clause and gross misconduct. It seems the news has reached his firm. Almost smiled. Almost. It was a domino effect. I had counted on the viral nature of the incident, but the speed was efficient beyond my expectations. So neither of them is covered? I asked. Correct, Ms. Gable said. This puts the hospital in a difficult position. We cannot deny care, but we cannot perform the extensive reconstructive work without a payment guarantee. We could do a rough separation, purely functional, but the scarring will be severe. To do it right, to minimize the damage, we need a guarantee of payment. I stopped pacing. I looked at Ms. Gable. I looked at the doctor. I can't pay for him, I said quietly. I won't pay for the man who is sleeping with my wife. Why should I? I understand, Ms. Gable said. But Mrs. Banks. I looked at the wall. She has a trust, I lied. She has her own money, but I can't access it. She's incapacitated. We can set up a payment plan, Ms. Gable suggested, but it would require you to sign as the guarantor. You would be liable for the debt. I looked at Vance. He was watching me, waiting to see if the jealous husband would bankrupt himself to save the unfaithful wife. It was a test of character. I stammered. I need to think. I need to call my lawyer. I can't just sign away $100,000. She did this to herself. She and him. Why should I lose my retirement because she wanted to have fun? It's your wife, Mr. Banks, Vance said. His voice was challenging. Is she? I asked, turning to him. The anger I allowed to surface now was real, or at least it felt real enough to sell. She's physically glued to another man. She lied to me. She plotted against me. And now I'm supposed to pay for their separation? It feels like I'm paying for their divorce from each other. Technically, Dr. Aris said uncomfortably, you are paying for the medical procedure to separate their tissues. No, I said firmly. I won't sign. Not for the cosmetic work. Do what you have to do to save her life. Stabilize her. But I'm not paying for plastic surgery to fix the consequences of her affair. Let her pay for it when she wakes up. Let him pay for it. Ms. Gable pursed her lips. Very well, Mr. Banks. We will proceed with the medical necessity protocol. It will be functional, but I must warn you, the aesthetic outcome will be poor. Do it, I said. Just get them apart. Ms. Gable nodded and left the room. Dr. Aris sighed, adjusted his coat, and followed her. I'll go prepare the team. It's going to be a long night. I was left alone with Detective Vance. The silence stretched between us like a tension cable. You're a hard man, Arthur, Vance said. He dropped the Mr. Banks. I'm a logical man, Detective, I replied, sitting back down. And I'm a man who has been humiliated. There are limits to generosity. You changed the insurance yesterday, Vance noted. That's quite a coincidence. Is it? I countered. I review my finances quarterly. The premiums were going up. I cut costs. I didn't know she was planning to do this. If I had known, I would have canceled the policy entirely, not just downgraded it. Or, Vance said, walking toward the door, you knew exactly what was going to happen, and you made sure it would hurt in every possible way. He stopped at the threshold. I'm going to find out where that glue came from, Arthur. And if I find a receipt with your name on it, I'm coming back with handcuffs. You won't find one, I said calmly. Vance left. I sat in the sterile silence of room 4B. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. The surgery would take hours. I imagined the scene in the operating room. The bright lights, the scalpel. They would wake up in separate rooms, in pain, disfigured, and in debt. The hospital bill would be the first of many. Jason was unemployed and uninsured. Emily was cut off. The stress of the debt would be the second phase of the punishment. Financial asphyxiation is slower than chemical bonding, but it is just as crushing. I stood up and walked out of the consultation room. I needed coffee. I walked toward the cafeteria. The hospital corridors were quieter now. The initial rush of the evening had settled into a steady hum of misery. I passed a waiting area where a TV was playing low-volume news. I stopped. The breaking news banner at the bottom of the screen caught my eye. Bizarre medical emergency in Bellevue. Police investigate adhesive incident. They didn't use names yet, but they showed a blurred image of the ambulance outside my house. And then a stock photo of Jason Miller with the caption, "Financial advisor hospitalized." The internet was already at work. The comment section, I imagined, was a cesspool of jokes and judgment. Their reputations were being incinerated in real time. I bought a black coffee from a vending machine. It tasted like burnt plastic. I drank it slowly, standing by a window that looked out over the city. The rain was still falling. Somewhere in the labyrinth of this building, my wife was under a knife. I felt a phantom sensation in my chest. Not pain, but a lightness. The heavy load I had been carrying for months, the suspicion, the jealousy, the feeling of being a fool. It was gone. I had externalized the pain. I had transferred the load onto them. I took out my phone. I opened the banking app. I moved the remainder of our joint savings into a secure, individual trust account I had established weeks ago. It was a protective measure, allowable under the preservation of assets clause during a separation event. I was not just divorcing her. I was evicting her from the life I had built. A nurse walked by, looking at me with pity. "Mr. Banks, can I get you a blanket?" "No, thank you," I said politely. "I'm fine. I'm just waiting." "It must be a shock," she said. "It is," I agreed. "You think you know someone. You think you have a solid foundation." And then I gestured vaguely at the hospital around us. Total collapse. "I'm so sorry," she said and walked away. She didn't know I was the architect of the collapse. She didn't know that I was the one who had pulled the pin. I went back to the waiting room. I needed to be there when they woke up. I needed to be the first face Emily saw. I needed to see the realization in her eyes, the moment she understood that this wasn't just an accident. I wanted to see if she could solve the equation. I sat down and pulled a structural engineering journal from my briefcase. I began to read an article about fatigue failure in suspension cables. The math was elegant, predictable. Unlike people, numbers never lied. The night wore on. The hospital hummed. And in the distance, I heard the faint sound of the siren, bringing another tragedy to the sterile hell, another mess for someone else to clean up. But my mess? My mess was being surgically removed, leaving scars that would never fade. I turned the page. Вот 4 глава вашей истории. Она написана на английском языке, в стиле глубокого психологического триллера, с фокусом на юридических и социальных последствиях, без использования запрещенных тем и слов, согласно вашим строгим инструкциям. In structural engineering, a progressive collapse is a catastrophic structural failure mode that occurs when a primary structural element fails, resulting in the failure of adjoining structural elements, which in turn causes further structural failure. It is a domino effect, where the initial damage is relatively small, but the consequential damage is total. The most famous examples are usually bridges or towers, but I have found that human lives collapse according to the exact same physics. Remove one load-bearing wall, reputation, and the roof comes down. 2 weeks had passed since the extraction. I refused to call it an accident. I refused to call it tragedy. In the privacy of my own mind, I called it the extraction. I was sitting in my office in downtown Seattle. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city into a watercolor of gray and steel. My colleagues were treating me with a delicate, suffocating kindness. They brought me extra coffee. They avoided asking about my weekend. They spoke in hushed tones when I walked by the break room. To them, I was the victim. I was the poor, stoic husband whose wife had been involved in a bizarre medical emergency that the local press was having a field day with. I opened my browser and checked the latest headlines. I did this every morning. It was a form of quality control, monitoring the stress tests on the subjects. The Seattle Chronicle had run a piece on page 4. Local financial firm terminates senior consultant following ethics violation. No names were mentioned in the headline, but the article was specific enough. It cited gross reputational damage and conduct unbecoming. Jason Miller was out. The firm he worked for managed high-net-worth portfolios. They sold trust. You cannot sell trust when you're the punchline of a dirty joke involving industrial adhesive. I clicked on a real estate blog. Market Watch, the stigma of stage homes. There was a blurred photo of a woman who looked remarkably like Emily. The article discussed how personal scandals can poison a realtor's brand. Emily's listings had been pulled. Her agency had quietly removed her profile from their Our Team page. She had been erased from the corporate structure as efficiently as I would remove a rusted bolt. I closed the browser. The satisfaction was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling of a balanced equation. My phone buzzed. It was my lawyer, Henrietta Cole. Henrietta was a shark in a Chanel suit. I had hired her not for her empathy, but for her ability to smell blood in the water. "Arthur," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "We have a situation. They are counter-maneuvering." "Who?" I asked, though I knew. "Counsel for your wife and Mr. Miller. They have formed a joint legal front. Desperation makes for strange bedfellows. They are filing a civil suit against you for intentional infliction of emotional distress, battery, and negligence. They are claiming you tampered with the product." "On what grounds?" I asked, spinning my pen on the desk. "Proof? Circumstantial. They claim the adhesive was too specific, too industrial. They say only an engineer would have access to such a compound. They are fishing, Arthur, but they're fishing with dynamite. They want a settlement. They want you to pay for the medical bills and the reconstructive surgeries, which, as I understand it, are significant." "How significant?" "Astronomical. The skin grafts alone are in the 6 figures. Miller is bankrupt. His severance package won't cover a tenth of it. Emily is cut off from your funds. They are cornered animals, and they are requesting a deposition. Tomorrow. Let them depose me," I said. "I have nothing to hide." "Arthur," Henrietta warned, "if they can prove malice, if they can prove you planted that bottle, the divorce settlement flips. You lose the house. You lose the assets. You might face criminal charges. Are you sure you want to walk into that room?" "I am sure," I said. "Set it up." I hung up. I looked out the window. The rain intensified. The deposition was held in the conference room of Henrietta's firm. It was a room designed to intimidate. Mahogany table, leather chairs, and a view of the Puget Sound that cost $500 an hour. When I walked in, the atmosphere was toxic. Emily was there. It was the first time I'd seen her since the ambulance. She looked diminished. She was wearing a high-neck sweater and loose trousers, hiding the bandages and the pressure garments I knew she had to wear. Her movements were stiff, robotic. She couldn't sit comfortably. The trauma to her skin meant that any friction was agony. She stood by the window, refusing to look at me. Jason Miller was seated, but he was perched on the edge of the chair, wincing every time he shifted his weight. He looked terrible. His tan was gone, replaced by a pallid, sickly complexion. He had lost weight. The arrogance that had defined him, the swagger of the successful predator, had been surgically removed. He looked at me with pure, distilled hatred. Their lawyer was a man named Sterling. He was loud, sweaty, and aggressive. He was a personal injury lawyer who usually chased ambulances, but today he was chasing a whale. "Mr. Banks," Sterling began, once the court reporter had set up her machine. "Let's cut the theatrics. We know you did it. We know you bought the adhesive. We know you swapped the bottles. This was a premeditated trap designed to harm my clients. Objection, Henrietta said boredly. Speculation. Ask a question, Mr. Sterling. Sterling leaned forward. Mr. Banks, did you purchase marine-grade epoxy in the week leading up to the incident? I am a structural engineer, I said calmly. I purchase adhesives, solvents, and industrial materials regularly for my work and for home repairs. My garage is full of them. Did you handle the specific bottle found in the bedroom? No, primelit. The lie was smooth, a polished stone. I was in Kelso. I have receipts. I was miles away. You prepared it beforehand. Jason shouted. He couldn't help himself. You knew. You sick psycho, you knew about us. Mr. Miller, restrain yourself, Henrietta said. I looked at Jason. I looked him directly in the eyes. I knew my wife was unhappy, I said softly. I didn't know she was sleeping with our financial advisor. If I had known, Jason, I would have fired you. I wouldn't have glued you to her. That seems counterproductive to a clean break. It's exactly what you would do, Emily spoke. Her voice was raspy. She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were hollow. You're cold, Arthur. You calculate everything. You wanted to ruin us. And you have. Look at us. I can't even walk without pain. I have scars that will never go away. You branded us. You branded yourselves, I said. You chose the time. You chose the place. You chose the product. It was tampered with. Sterling slammed his hand on the table. And we will prove it. We are petitioning for a forensic analysis of your workshop. We will find traces of the mixture. And when we do, we will own you. We are asking for $5 million in damages. I sat back in my chair. This was the moment. The stress point. They were bluffing about the forensic traces. I had cleaned the workshop with medical-grade solvent 3 times. But they were confident in their narrative. They had convinced themselves that I was the villain, which gave them moral armor. I needed to crack that armor. You claim, I said, addressing Sterling, that this was a malicious act by me, that I planted a trap, which implies that you two are innocent victims who had no reason to suspect anything was wrong until it was too late. Exactly, Sterling said. And you claim that you immediately knew it was me? That as soon as the incident occurred, you realized Arthur did this? Yes, Jason spat. We knew immediately. Interesting, I said. I reached into my briefcase. Because that's not what the evidence suggests. What evidence? Sterling sneered. You have nothing. I have the hospital records, I said. And I have something else. I pulled out a small USB drive. When I arrived at the hospital, I explained, keeping my voice level, I was a distraught husband. I brought a bag of personal items for my wife. Clothes, toiletries, things I thought she might need. I left the bag in the recovery room before you woke up from the separation surgery. You were both placed in the same room for post-op observation because the police wanted to keep you together for questioning. I placed the drive on the table. I inadvertently left a dictaphone in that bag. It's an old habit. I use it for site inspections. It was recording. It captured the first conversation you had when the anesthesia wore off. Before you had time to concoct this story about me. The room went silent. The silence of a tomb. This is illegal, Sterling said, but his voice wavered. Two-party consent. Washington is a two-party consent state, Henrietta interrupted, smiling sharply. However, there's an exception for recording evidence of a crime or fraud. And since you're currently attempting to defraud my client by claiming a false narrative to extort money, I think the judge will find it admissible. Or, at the very least, the media will find it fascinating. I pressed play on my laptop. The audio was grainy, mixed with the beep of heart monitors and the hiss of oxygen. But the voices were unmistakable. Audio groan, rustling sheets. Jason's voice slurred, "Oh God, it burns. My skin." Emily's voice, weak, "Jason, is it off?" Jason, they cut it. I think they cut it off. Jesus, look at my leg. Emily, why did you bring that bottle? I told you to use the one I bought. Jason, I didn't bring it. You said you ordered online. You said it was the premium stuff. Emily, I did. It was in the drawer. You must have grabbed the wrong thing. You're such an idiot, Jason. Did you bring superglue? Why was there glue in the drawer? Jason, I didn't bring anything. You have a messy house. Maybe your freak husband keeps his model airplane glue in there. You checked the bottle. You said it smelled like strawberries. Emily, it did smell like strawberries. That's why I used it. It must have been a bad batch. A recall. I'm going to sue the company. Amazon sent me poison. Jason, you cheapskate. You bought knockoff crap, and now I'm ruined. My firm, if they find out. Emily, shut up. Just shut up. We have to get our story straight. We can't say we messed up. We have to say it was him. Jason, Arthur, Emily. Yes. Who else? He's weird. He's an engineer. We tell them he did it. Otherwise, we're just two morons who glued ourselves together with a defective product. We need someone to pay for this, Jason. I can't pay for this. Jason, yeah. Okay. He did it. He must have. That creates liability. That gets us a settlement. I stopped the recording. The silence in the conference room was no longer just heavy. It was crushing. It was the sound of structural vacuum. Jason was staring at the table, his face the color of ash. Emily had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Sterling, their bulldog lawyer, looked like he had just swallowed a lemon whole. So, I said, closing my laptop. As we can hear, in the immediate aftermath, you didn't think I did it. You thought it was a bad batch. You thought it was incompetence. You conspired to blame me because you needed a payout. That is fraud. That is conspiracy. And that, I looked at Sterling, is the end of your lawsuit. Henrietta leaned forward. If you proceed with this suit, we will release this recording to the press. We will file countersuits for defamation, fraud, and legal fees. We will ensure that not only do you get nothing, but you will also face criminal charges for filing a false police report. Sterling closed his folder. He didn't look at his clients. He knew a collapsed building when he saw one. We will take this under advisement, Sterling muttered. You have 24 hours to withdraw the suit, Henrietta said, and to sign the divorce papers as they stand. Uncontested. Arthur keeps the house. Arthur keeps the savings. You get nothing but your debt and each other. Jason stood up. He was shaking. You planned this, he whispered, looking at me. You still did it. That recording doesn't prove you didn't do it. It just proves we didn't know. It proves you are liars, I said simply. And in a court of law, credibility is everything. You have none left. Emily looked at me. There was no anger left in her eyes, only a vast, terrifying emptiness. She saw the stranger she had been married to for 10 years. She saw the engineer who had dismantled her life without raising his voice. Why, Arthur? She asked. Why didn't you just yell? Why didn't you just leave? Because, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket, yelling is inefficient, and leaving leaves loose ends. I prefer a permanent solution. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, revealing a sliver of cold, pale blue sky. I walked out onto the street. The air tasted clean. My phone buzzed again. It was a notification from my bank. Transfer complete. The funds were secured. I walked toward my car. I passed a newsstand. The headline was still there, but it felt old now. The world would move on. People would forget Jason Miller and Emily Banks. They would become a trivia question, a cautionary tale told at cocktail parties. Did you hear about the couple who got stuck? But for them, it would never end. The scars on their skin would tighten every time the weather changed. The debt would follow them like a shadow. Every time they looked in a mirror, they would see the result of their own actions, amplified by my design. I got into my car. I sat there for a moment, listening to the engine hum. It was a perfect machine. Thousands of parts working in unison. If one part failed, the check engine light came on. You fixed it, or you replaced it. I had replaced the faulty parts of my life. I drove toward the highway. I was going to the house. My house. It was empty now. I had hired a cleaning crew to scrub the bedroom. to replace the carpet, to repaint the walls. I was going to sell it. I didn't want to live there anymore. It was a structure that had been compromised. But before I sold it, I had one last thing to do. I needed to go to the garage. I needed to pour the rest of the adhesive into a proper hazardous waste container. A responsible engineer always cleans up his site. As I drove, I thought about the recording. I hadn't lied about the bag, but I had omitted one detail. I hadn't inadvertently left the dictaphone. I had sewn it into the lining of the toiletry bag I packed for Emily. I knew she would check for her moisturizer the moment she could move her hands. I knew they would talk. I knew human nature. People under stress do not reflect. They project. They blame. They scramble. I had banked on their moral weakness just as I had banked on the chemical strength of the epoxy. Both had performed exactly to spec. I turned on the radio. No music this time. Just the quiet hum of the tires on the pavement. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like structural integrity. The dissolution of a marriage is, legally speaking, a contract termination. It is a bureaucratic dismantling of a joint enterprise, requiring the same level of paperwork as closing a failed subsidiary or liquidating a bankrupt company. I sat in the judge's chambers, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished mahogany table, and listened to the scratching of a fountain pen. It was the sound of my freedom. The judge, a woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, stamped the final decree with a heavy, rhythmic thud. It was over. The structure known as the marriage of Arthur and Emily Banks had been officially condemned and demolished. I walked out of the courthouse into the gray afternoon. It was November now. The air was crisp, smelling of wet leaves and exhaust fumes. I adjusted my scarf. I felt lighter. The physical weight of the past few months, the nights in the motel, the interrogation rooms, the depositions, the calculated silence, had lifted. I was no longer a husband. I was just Arthur Banks, structural engineer. The settlement had been brutal. My lawyer, Henrietta, had been surgical in her application of the law. Because the incident had been ruled a result of reckless personal conduct by the insurance investigators, and because the audio recording had destroyed their leverage, Emily and Jason had no bargaining power. The prenuptial agreement held firm. I kept the assets. I kept the retirement funds. I kept the equity. Emily received a small lump sum, barely enough to cover a deposit on an apartment in a less desirable zip code, and certainly not enough to cover the mountain of medical debt she now dragged behind her like a prisoner's chain. I had one final obligation to fulfill. The house. We had sold it. Or rather, I had sold it. The house of glue, as the neighborhood teenagers had started calling it, was no longer a place I could inhabit. The walls remembered too much. I had found a buyer, a young tech executive from California who didn't care about the gossip, only about the square footage and the school district. He offered cash. We were closing in 3 days. But before the keys could be handed over, the house had to be completely empty. I drove there for the last time. The subdivision looked the same as it always did. Pristine, quiet, indifferent. The lawns were manicured. The fences were white. But as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the subtle differences. The neighbor's curtains twitched. A gardener 2 houses down paused his blower to watch me. I was a celebrity here, a dark legend in a beige world. I parked the car and unlocked the front door. The house was hollow. The furniture was gone, auctioned off or donated. The art was taken down, leaving pale rectangles on the walls where the sun hadn't faded the paint. Steps echoed on the hardwood floors. I walked through the living room, the dining room, the kitchen. Every sound was amplified. I went upstairs. I walked down the hallway to the master bedroom. The room had been sanitized. I had hired a specialized biohazard cleaning crew, the kind that cleans up after crime scenes, to remove the carpet and treat the subfloor. The new carpet was a neutral gray. The walls had been repainted a stark white. The smell of lavender and lemon was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh paint and emptiness. I stood in the center of the room. I looked at the spot where the bed had been. I calculated the vectors, the load bearing, the shear force. It was here that the physics of their betrayal had met the chemistry of my retribution. I heard a car pull into the driveway. I walked to the window. It was a battered sedan, 10 years old, with a dent in the rear bumper. Emily got out. She moved slowly, carefully. She was wearing a high-collar coat and a scarf wrapped multiple times around her neck, despite the mild chill. She wore sunglasses, though it was cloudy. She had come to sign the final transfer deed for the title. Her name was on the deed, so her signature was required to sell, even if the money wasn't going to her. I went downstairs to meet her. I opened the door before she could knock. "Hello, Emily," I said. She stopped at the threshold. She didn't look at me. She looked past me, into the empty hallway. "Arthur." Her voice was thin, brittle. "Come in," I said. "It's just on the kitchen island. I brought a pen." She stepped inside. She walked with a slight limp. The skin grafts on her thigh, I knew from medical reports, were still tight. They would restrict her range of motion for years. She unwound the scarf slightly as she entered the warmth of the house. The result of the traction and the severe adverse reaction from where her shoulder had been pressed against Jason's chest. We walked to the kitchen. The island was the only surface left. The papers were waiting. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking. A fine, neurological tremor. "Is this it?" she asked. "This is it," I confirmed. "Sign there and there. The notary has already stamped my portion. Once you sign, the wire transfer happens, and the house belongs to Mr. Chun." She signed. Her signature, once a flamboyant loop of confidence, was small and cramped. She put the pen down. "Where will you go?" she asked, looking at the empty space where the refrigerator used to be. "I bought a condo in the city," I said. "Belltown, 25th floor. View of the Sound. Concrete and glass. Very structural." "Of course," she said bitterly. "No yard to maintain. No mesi nature." "Efficiency," I corrected. She turned to me then. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were rimmed with red. There were lines around her mouth that hadn't been there 6 months ago. She looked aged, eroded. "How is Jason?" I asked. The question was polite, conversational, as if asking about a mutual acquaintance. She flinched. "I don't know. I don't speak to him. He moved back to Ohio to live with his sister. He can't work in finance anymore. His license was revoked. I think he's working in a warehouse." "Fitting," I said. "You enjoy this," she whispered. "You stand there in your suit, looking so calm, so perfect. You enjoy knowing that you destroyed us." "I didn't destroy you, Emily," I said, leaning against the counter. "I merely accelerated the inevitable failure of a flawed structure. You and Jason, you were building on sand. You were lying. You were stealing. You were planning to take this house, my money, my reputation. I just applied a stress test." "A stress test?" She laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. "You glued us together. You humiliated us before the entire world. Do you know what it's like? To walk into a grocery store and have people whisper? To have no job? To have debt collectors calling every hour?" "I can imagine," I said. "It sounds stressful." "You're a monster," she spat. "You're not a man. You're a machine." "Perhaps," I said. "But machines are reliable. Machines don't cheat. Machines don't lie." She shook her head. "You reacted so fast. That's what I can't understand. I saw the logs. You found the texts on Tuesday. You bought the glue on Wednesday. You set the trap on Friday. It was so impulsive for you." I looked at her. I decided it was time. The final demolition. The removal of the last support beam. "Impulsive?" I repeated. "Emily, do you really think I operate on a 3-day timeline?" I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was soft with age, the ink slightly faded but legible. I unfolded it and placed it on the granite counter between us. "What is this?" she asked, looking down. "A receipt," I said, "from a pharmacy in downtown Seattle. Look at the date." She squinted. "March 12th. She looked up, confused. That was 8 months ago." "Correct," I said. "And look at the item. She read it. Prescription, sildenafil, 100 milligrams, Jason's prescription. I found this in your car in March, I said quietly. Under the passenger seat. You must have dropped it when you picked it up for him. Or maybe you dropped it. It doesn't matter. She stared at the paper. Her face went pale. I knew in March, I continued. I knew before you even booked the hotel for your girl's trip to Napa. I knew when you started buying new lingerie. I knew when you opened the secret credit card. You knew for 8 months? She whispered. But we had dinner. We went to your parents' anniversary. We lived a lie, I said. I watched you. I analyzed the data. I didn't act immediately because I needed the variables to align. I needed Jason to be in a position of maximum vulnerability. I needed you to be overconfident. I took a step closer. I didn't just find out and snap, Emily. I engineered this. I recommended Jason to his firm. Did you know that? I played golf with his boss last year. I mentioned Jason was a go-getter. I helped him get that job because I knew that firm has the strictest morality clause in the industry. I placed him on a pedestal so the fall would be fatal. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. And the insurance, I went on. I didn't change it the day before the accident. I started the process of downgrading your policy 3 months ago, citing administrative errors to delay the notification letters so you wouldn't see them until it was too late. I timed the final policy switch to coincide with my trip to Portland. She backed away, hitting the counter. You steered us. I guided the load, I said. I knew you were lazy, Emily. I knew you wouldn't check the bottle if it smelled right. I knew Jason was arrogant. I knew you would bring him here the moment I left. I didn't force you to cheat. I simply built the bridge you wanted to cross, and I made sure it would collapse exactly when I was standing on safe ground. She looked at me with horror, absolute primal horror. She realized then that she hadn't been fighting a jealous husband. She had been fighting a force of nature, a slow, grinding glacier that had been moving toward her for months. Why? She cried. Why wait? Why not just divorce me in March? Because of the prenup, I said calmly. The infidelity clause required irrefutable physical proof. Photos can be faked. Texts can be explained away. But 2 people surgically joined in the act? That is irrefutable. And I paused, allowing a rare, cold smile to touch my lips. I wanted to see if the adhesive would work. The specs were impressive. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, she grabbed her purse. She didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. The foundation of her reality, the idea that she was the clever one, the one in control, had been pulverized. She turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door open and close. I watched from the window as she got into her battered car. She sat there for a minute, her head on the steering wheel, shoulders shaking. Then she started the engine and drove away, out of the subdivision, out of my life. I picked up the receipt from the counter. I folded it carefully and put it back in my pocket. A souvenir. I did a final walkthrough of the house. I checked the windows. I checked the thermostat. Everything was in order. The house was a blank slate, ready for Mr. Chun and his optimism. I walked out to the garage. My car was waiting. I got in and backed out of the driveway. I didn't look back at the house. I looked forward through the windshield at the road ahead. The drive to the city was smooth. I listened to a podcast about brutalist architecture. The narrator spoke about the honesty of concrete, how it doesn't hide its nature, how it endures. It was soothing. I arrived at my new building. The doorman, a man named George, nodded to me. Good evening, Mr. Banks. Good evening, George. I took the elevator to the 25th floor. The door slid open with a whisper. My apartment was sparse, minimalist. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Puget Sound. The water was dark, choppy, reflecting the lights of the ferries. I walked to the kitchen. It was stainless steel and black marble. I opened a bottle of sparkling water. I stood by the window and looked out at the city. I was 42 years old. I was single. I was wealthy. I was free. Most men in my position would feel lonely. They would feel the silence of the empty apartment as a burden. but I felt it as a victory. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of chaos. It is the absence of friction. I walked to the bookshelf in the living room. It was the only cluttered part of the apartment, filled with my engineering texts. On the middle shelf, sitting between a book on suspension bridges and a manual on fluid dynamics, was a small object. It was a tube of adhesive, the same brand, unopened. I had bought it at the hardware store earlier that day. Not to use, just to have. I picked it up. I felt the weight of it. It was a simple object, a mixture of chemicals, resin and hardener, potential energy waiting for a catalyst. I remember the look on Emily's face when I showed her the receipt. That moment of realization. That was the true deadlock. The moment when the mind realizes it is trapped in a construct of someone else's design. I put the tube back on the shelf. I went to my desk and sat down. I opened my laptop. I had a new project starting on Monday, a retrofit of a viaduct in California. It was in a seismic zone. The ground there was unstable, prone to shifting without warning. The challenge was to build something rigid enough to stand, yet flexible enough to survive the tremors. I pulled up the CAD file. I started to draw lines, angles, vectors. The world is full of chaos. People lie. Relationships rust. Love fatigues. But physics? Physics is loyal. If you calculate the load correctly, if you choose the right materials, if you account for the stress, it will hold. I typed a command. The screen shifted, rotating the 3D model of the bridge. It was perfect. I smiled. Structure stable. I whispered to the empty room. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't answer back. It just held.